As the program flyer said, whether you're a Khoja or not, or are just curious as to what a Khoja is, you have come to the right place. To help us in this, we have three very eminent and dynamic Khoja speakers in Dr. Sibtain Bhai Panjwani, Alhaj Hassan Bhai A.M. Jafar, Dr. Hasnain Bhai Walji, and Dr. Iqbal Bhai Akhtar.
I commend the MARC team for not only coming up with a brilliant topic of discussion, which is long overdue, but actually hosting it in Toronto and inviting the best speakers so that all of us here are able to participate and benefit from it. For that, I say thank you and Jazakallah. Therefore, my expectation of this symposium is that while we spend time to relate the Khoja history and explain the moral and ethical imperatives on why we should promote the rich and illustrious cultural heritage, we should also conduct a candid assessment of where we stand today. Then come up with credible and achievable solutions or guidelines that can be applied globally or locally.
It gives me a great pleasure to be here with all of you today at the Khoja Heritage Symposium. On behalf of Nasimco, I would like to commend Dr. Hasnain Walji, who conceived the idea of creating these resource centers around the globe. Programs like the one this weekend are great examples of this and testament to something that Marhum Mullah Sahib strived for and worked tirelessly on throughout his life.
With those pleasant words of duty, I think we begin the real business of today. As Shabir Bhai said rightly, the expectations are that if there is a big elephant in the room, let's identify it. Let us identify that big elephant in the room. That's why we are here. There will not be that very polite conversation today. Don't expect it. We will try to drive home some points, and we will move ourselves from the comfort zone, and that is the only way that perhaps we can move on as the world around us changes, that we not only change as the world changes, but we actually become the agents of change within the society that we live in. And that, indeed, is the expectation, and thank you for building that expectation, and inshallah we will hear from you.
So the question is, who is the Khoja? And of course, some of you are Khoja, some of you are not Khoja, but really to give you sort of a little bit of an academic take in terms of thinking about the early history of the Khoja. Now, according to one of the books that's there in the library, Khoja Vratant, Sajiddina Nanjiani says the origins of the Khoja are two main castes, according to tradition, the Lohana and the Chak caste that come from Kashmir and Punjab. And then over time, there's a migration over the course of a couple hundred years into Sindh, and then eastward into Kutch and Kathiawar, right? And what we're finding out through academic research, particularly in France, and a lot of the leading work on Khoja history is coming through France, not in the Anglophone world, interestingly enough, is that we see a lot of remarkable things, that the Khoja themselves are not necessarily one cohesive community. So everyone is not just Khoja by virtue of everyone being born into one family or one group. What happens is there were many different subgroups that were brought into who are the Khoja. So sometimes you'll see names, right? Surnames. Bhatia, for instance. There are some Khojas that have a surname Bhatia, right? Clearly that's a different caste, right? You'll see sort of Ramji. So we know that some of these groups are Lohana and other groups. You'll hear Patel, for instance. There are some Khojas that have a surname Patel. So we know they're from Patidar caste. So what's happening in the 18th and 19th century is there's also these different traditions within local contexts and languages and cultures, right? So for instance, we think about the idea of, for instance, deen, right? This is a fundamental concept, the idea of deen, right? How would we understand deen in a society that doesn't have religion according to the same? So what is the translation for deen in Gujarati or Kutchi? How would you sort of translate that? And that was a really important concept. So the closest concept we would have would be something like dharam, for instance. And how would you think of dharam? Dharam is somewhat different than deen, right? So how do you translate these ideas for a society that has no understanding of that? How do you translate the idea of Rasul, for instance, right, to people who have no concept of a prophet in the same way? So the translation and eventually became Aftar, right? Muhammad was an Aftar. That was the way that you could translate it in sort of a local context. So there are a lot of things that are going on here. How does it change you mentally to go from one script to another, right? What do you leave and how does your identity shift when you can't read the language of your ancestors? Okay, so think about the young Khojas that are born in Canada. How many of them have the ability to read Gujarati? Very few. What does that do to their identity when they can't read what their ancestors wrote? Right? How are they able to access their heritage and their history? Right? So it's only in English, right? So if you translate something, that's the only way that they have an ability to understand their heritage. And that's why it's so important for us, I think, in going forward with the Khoja Heritage Project, is to do large-scale translations into English and French, right? All these major texts, histories, traditions have to be translated for a modern sort of audience. And I think that's a way to get young people enthusiastic and motivated about thinking about the history and heritage of the community. So of course, and just to do about Haji Naji, Ghulam Ali Ismail, right? Bhavnagar, we know sort of some of the history studied under Mullah Qadir. He's important because modern Khoja ethnosphere identity would not have been possible without him. Why is that important? Because he is articulating a fundamentally new way of being Khoja according to the ethnosphere tradition, okay? And he's doing that through printed texts, and these texts are then sent all across the Western Indian Ocean world, from Mogadishu to Zanzibar to Durban. I mean, these texts are going all over the world. And in many ways, people are also first learning to read using these texts. People were saying Gujarati is a kafir language. You can't translate the Quran into Gujarati. It's absolutely un-Islamic. You can't do that. So what did he do? Then he goes to Iran and Iraq, and particularly Iraq, and gets different mujtahids to say it's okay, all right, to allow him to do that. And he also gets a professor of Persian at Ahmedabad University to also certify it academically that this is a good translation and things like that, right? Really what's happening is that the transliteration scheme that Haji Naji develops really opens up the Gujarati language to Arabic and Persian materials. So now, in a more consistent manner, you have the ability to translate these documents and traditions of the Arabic tradition into Gujarati, right? So duas like Ganje Arsh, right? All these things are being translated into Gujarati after Haji Naji, right? In a very systematic way. And also, it becomes available to everybody, right? These Khochki manuscripts, there are very few people who had the ability to write, much less read these manuscripts. So it's a very small preserve of people. So that literacy through the Quran then really helps to change sort of the identity of this Nashri Khoja community.
Today, the topic of mine is keeping Khoja Shia Ethnosphere Muslim identity in the 21st century. So why should we be interested in our own identity? Well, first of all, how we perceive each other is very important. The questions like who we are and where we came from. When we are asked who we are, tame kon cho, tu kon cho, really what he's asking is, tame kewa cho? Seriously, what are you made of? What is your character? And the idea here is when somebody is asking you, who are you, he's wondering whether, am I like you or am I not like you? Am I different from you? If I'm like you, then I will build friendship with you. If I'm not like you, I will not build friendship with you. As far as notion of Khojaness amongst our youth is concerned, our youth do struggle with the notion of Khojaness, Khoja. They say, well, in our life, Khoja is irrelevant. Sadly and unfortunately, one of the reasons why they do find that is because they are not aware of their heritage. And when they are made aware of their heritage, they do become proud of the fact that they have a heritage, that they have an identity, that they don't have to laugh it off when somebody else makes jokes about Khojas. No, they will stand there and defend themselves. If they know who they are, and if they know where they come from, and if they know how much balidan, that means blood and sweat, our great-grandfathers have put in to make this community available to us. Really, they did not understand about Khoja heritage. They did not feel that we're part of it, although they are swimming in it. The youths were swimming in it, and the question that I raised with them is that, look, if you are not interested in this community, and yet you get the benefits of this community, you swim in it, and if you don't contribute the way our generations have contributed to make this community a moving community, what guarantee is there that this community will be just like this, giving benefits to your children and grandchildren and grandchildren? You are taking as granted that this community will survive like that. What we need to, if we need to change, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is the vehicle which would allow us to change? The first thing we have to do is where we are. And if I show you this, a thick community has a very thick wall around it. No outsider can come in, no different values can come in, no different culture can come in, no different race can come in. Are we at this stage? Are we a thick community? No more. Okay, let me show you this then. Are we this community then? Maximum individualism, maximum diversity, maximum freedom, community gone. Do we want to be there? And the thing is, the step 2 is to have that realization that family unit, madrasa and mimbar are have overlapping relationships. And if we accept the fact that family issues and mimbar issues and madrasa issues can be tackled together because they overlap, that's the second step, that realization. And then the third step would be that we can all work together. Those three institutions can work together in an interlocking way. The thing is that they're not working together in an interlocking way at this stage in time. We have, but we haven't consolidated. We haven't put it together. And then, of course, a possible dynamic structure is a formation of a joint board where parents, madrasa teachers, and alims and ulamas all come together on a board, and that is a permanent board residing permanently within the Executive Council and staring at the President and staring at the Executive Council all the time. These are our issues. When are you going to solve them? When are we going to give the resources? We have the expertise.
There is nothing special in belonging to the Khoja community except for one thing. At one stage in their history, they had put on their thinking caps. They took an introspective look at themselves, reviewed their belief system and practices, and having recognized their shortcomings, they were ready to make amends, move towards a change, and reorganize themselves. This is how the Khoja Shaikh Nasri Muslim community came into being 1.5 centuries ago. 150 years later, where do we stand today? What are the problems we are facing? Effects of hegemonic outlook, and silent majority apathy, and the 2R syndrome. Now, what is 2R syndrome? It is in the epilogue, page 489. 1.5 centuries ago, we rejected the religious and social control exercised by successive Aga Khans. We dispensed with the concept of the Khan and were left with that of the Aga. Instead of one Aga Khan, we acquired hundreds of Aga, minus the pontificating Khan. In the vacuum caused, stepped in the power barons, the Setia and the Vadera culture, keen not to miss an opportunity to exploit the naive and gullible thinking of the masses to entrench their hold over the society in various forms. The combination of 2R, the rich and the religious. In the spirit of the Persian saying, Tu mara qazi bigu ya man tura haji bigu. You call me qazi and I call you haji. Has been highly detrimental to the society. Added to this, the docile silent majority has completed the troika to contribute a negative growth. For its apathetic approach, the silent majority cannot be absolved of its responsibility. This is the million-dollar question I'm posing. To be a good Muslim, do we have to be Arab and adopt Arab traditions and practices? To be good Shia, do we have to be Irani and adopt Irani traditional practices? How do we view Islam? As an Oriental practice or a universal religion? The underlying challenge facing the community is, in the West, is enshrining Islamic values in our everyday lives, not in our mosque, in our madrasa. This is the challenge we have to ask. If we do nothing and we relive the past, chalte ki naam gaadi, President ne bana will we have gave him vote. It is irresponsible. On the day of Qiyamah, we'll hold him responsible. You did not handle this. Chair lady and the president will suffer. Samjha? The Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina kafaru la ta'tadiru al-yawma tujzawna ma kuntum ta'malun. This is that day you will reap what you sow. This is the Quran. My responsibility is alone. Jamaat's responsibility, me, you together makes Jamaat. Jamaat does not make me.
The Khoja Shia ethnic community has been blessed with the support of the Maraja, be it Ayatollah Burujardi, be it Ayatollah Hakim, or be it Ayatollah Al-Khoei and Ayatollah Gulpaigani, Ayatollah Araki, and Ayatollah Sistani. This is the majority of the Khojas have followed that lineage. That by way of spiritual guidance and allowing us the use of hukuk to fund our projects. Now, the dynamics are evolving. Nothing remains the same. Much as we would like to be nostalgic about the past, the communication with the Maraje is now being filtered. The fast-paced world and the conflicts that we have in the Middle East means that the focus on our comparatively minute community in that part of the world is of course decreasing. And then, of course, there are voices of dissent, particularly amongst our intellectuals and our youth. If there is intellectual rigor, if there is debate, and if there are thinkers today who will think, they should not be banned. They should be encouraged to engage with the community and say that let us have that robust conversation. The spirit of inquiry that Hassan Bhai talked about, it was that spirit of inquiry that actually took us where we are, and then complacency sets in, and then we say, Bas Maulana ne puche jo, what am I going to get? If I want to buy a computer, I'm going to go Google everything under the sun about that. Why can't we do it something that affects our life and the hereafter? So, we do have a problem. We have the highest level of respect for the Maraja, Ayatollah Sistani, and the other Maraja who sit in Najaf, and some in Qum, I dare say, not all. But the Marjaiya, which has till now operated on the bedrock of personal integrity of the Marja, is now being conducted by way of a proxy. This is where we as a community need to put our minds. I don't have all the solutions. Secondly, with the development that are happening in Iran, that there is a dramatic change in the financial resources of the clerical establishment as we know it. And the transition that we used to have. The idea of Ahl Khibra determining for us as to who the next most learned the alam is going to be was the work of Ahl Khibra. It was not a government-inspired document which my submission, Mominin, is that the Marjaya as we have known it for the past 200 years is not going to change. It's already changing. The change is in place. A fundamental development in the political, social authority of our spiritual leadership requires a response from us. From us as a community, we have matured, Mu'mineen, over 150, 160 years, going through trials and tribulations. We have matured as a community to understand our spiritual responsibilities. Why are we trying to rely on others? Why do we have this? Why do we have this culture of dependency? We are a mature society. Let us have that confidence. While we talk about our identity, while we talk about our culture, we must also talk about who is going to guide us from a spiritual and a religious perspective. What I'm saying is nothing new. I didn't suddenly wake up and say this must be done. 30 years ago, published in Marjaya wa Ruhaniyat by Ayatollah Mutahari, he advocated a concept of a marjaya by way of a body, not a single individual. And then this man here, whom we remember so often, he was my mentor and a mentor of many, Siten's mentor. We worked with him for so many years, so close to him. He could foresee. These are his words. And these words are available on a CD published by the World Federation. He said, Marjaya has to be changed. It should be in a form of a body, otherwise it will not be acceptable. He foresaw this day coming. Marjaya of Ummah has to be in the form of a committee as a body where the issues of the community are tackled in the form of an institution. And I quote his exact words, and these are there on tape. He said, in the fiqh, the marja of taqlid I accept. In marja of ummah, there has to be a change. Sometimes, in terms of our management, we have a democracy that shames the British. But when it comes to spiritual affairs, why do we get cowed down? Our scholars, our thinkers, our intellectuals need to come together and start thinking about creating such a body.
My views are somewhat too radical for comfort. We have lost the battle. Lost the battle of Gujarati. We have Khojas of Pakistan, 50,000. How many speak Gujarati now? હવે આપણે કહે છે જમાત કરે તો ગુજરાતીમાં કહીએ ડાય સાસરે જાય ગાંધીજી શિખામણ દે ઘરે જ પોતે મારા બચાવ સાથે હું ગુજરાતી ના બોલું ને જમાતનો પ્રેસિડેન્ટ બિચારો ગુજરાતી શીખવાડે એક વખતે હું ગુજરાતીમાં બોલતો હતો મેં તો ભાઈઓ અનિવાર્ય સંજોગોને લઈને એવી આવશ્યકતા ઉપસ્થિત થાય તો વાસ્તવિકતાને લક્ષ્યમાં લઈને સમય સાથે સમજૂત કરવી જોઈએ તો એક ભાઈ મારા જંબારી મિત્ર હતા કે બાના કે શું ચાકુના પીઠે ઈ કી પારા યોઠે શુકી નાની But the truth is that English is the language of today and tomorrow, and until and unless we are prepared to inculcate our values.
We may be talking perception about Gujarati language because the data that I have, which the survey suggests to me, is that there is a reversal. There are people who are over 40s are recommending that the community should bring Gujarati back. Now, I can't give you why. I haven't done the analysis as to why they are requesting that. There must be some geopolitical reason for that. And one of the issues that we will be suffering from, and this is evidence in academia at the moment, is the fact that 21st century identity crisis is the biggest challenge for everyone because of the sheer global forces. So, lose your identity and you have identity crisis. So, Gujarati language, to give it up, I'm not so sure. Let's be cool about the whole thing and let's see how the community wants it as well.
તો પહેલા તો હું કહીશ કે જોયું ને હું ગુજરાતીમાં બોલું છું એટલે તમે ખુશ થયા હે પણ ઇંગ્લિશમાં છે ને તમે ટેન્શનમાં હતા બધા બરાબર છે, કારણ કે ઇંગ્લિશ તમને દિમાગમાં બોલે છે, ગુજરાતી તમારે દિલની ભાષા છે. અમારા મડાગાસ્કરમાં હમણાં સુધી અલ્હમ્દુલિલ્લાહ જરાક ઠીક છે, પણ હવે આહિસ્તે આહિસ્તે બીજા બધાનો જે આપણા બીજા સંસ્થાની પ્રેશરના હિસાબે અમારી સંસ્થા અમારા ઉપર પ્રેશર કરે છે ને અમે બીજી ભાષામાં આવવાની કોશિશ કરીએ છીએ. જેમ તમે હમણાં કહી ગયા કે હવે ફ્રેન્ચીમાં મજલિસ પડાવો, એ બહારનો પ્રેશરથી ને અમારા પ્રેશર આવે છે. બરાબર છે ને? એટલે કે અમને પોતાને મહેનત કરવી પડે છે. એટલે એમ કરી મહેનત કરી તકલીફ ઉપાડી ને બચ્ચાઓને આગળ લઈ આવ્યા છે. અમારે ત્યાં તકલીફ છે, પણ આજે તમે મારી નવાસી સાથે બોલો ને તો એ કહેશ ને નાની મને છે ને તારી બગલમાં રાખ. બરાબર છે ને? તમે એ સાંભળ્યું છે? નાની મને છે ને તું ઓલું નવસેકું પાણી આપને. હા, તો આપણે વિચાર આવે કે આ છોકરાઓ જો એમ, કારણ કે આપણે મહેનત કરવી પડે છે. એટલે ચોઈસ શું કરવાનું છે? આપણે એક જણાને ચોઈસ છે. તમે બધા જવાબદાર તમારા કુટુંબના છો.
See, language is one component of our identity in our culture. There are several components, and I think we need to beef up the strongest ones so that the weaker ones, like language, may survive, may not survive, but still our identity survives. Abdullah says we are all for universal values, good human beings. I do not believe that calling yourself a Khoja, having an identity as a Khoja, is mutually exclusive to being a good human being. So, on that score, I think we can have both. We can have our cake and eat it too. Alhamdulillah.
Hearing that probably the Ayatollah Sistani is the last marjaiyat from a marjaiyat perspective, what is it as a community, collectively, a process or a thought process of the follow-up after Sistani? Is that there will be fragmentation in the community from my perspective looking around and what is going on. What is the community, or what should the community be doing?
Ghulam Bhai, the question, first of all, let me clarify this. I did not say that Sistani is a last marja. I am quoting Mehdi Khalaji and inviting our people to read the paper which says Sistani the last marja. Traditionally, we have relied on the leadership of the community working closely with Ahl Khibra to see where the next marja, who we should be referring to. And for the next 10 years, maybe this process will continue because Ayatollah Sistani has his contemporaries like Agha Bashir Najafi, Agha Fayyaz, Agha Hakim, who are in. I'm saying there's a decade in which we need to create such institutions which will work closely with some of the theological schools. But we should be in a position, number one, as we could before, be able to convey our challenges to those quarters. At the same time, we should have a level of independence in terms of how we work. The golden period of the World Federation was a period of Ayatollah Al-Khoi. He allowed us so much latitude to be able to serve the community so that we were working virtually independently with his blessings. We did not have to answer for our needs to sons and sons-in-laws. This is changing. The governments are coming in. This is changing. So, Gujarati અંદર જે કે સાવચેત રહેવાની જરૂર છે. The point is that we need to develop. We need to start thinking. We need to start creating structures. No, we are not going to have instant answers. But we have this decade. But we should not be in a position 20 years hence, when some of us may not even be there, to say, well, maybe we should have taken a turn this way instead of going this way. This is what we need to do. We hope that you will be ambassadors to go and discuss this with others. We build a consensus. A community moves forward. The waves only come when the drops are willing to move with it. The leader, when Gandhi said, I must follow my people, because I'm their leader. When he was on Sabarmati Walk, he knew what he was talking about. You need to take the people with you. Otherwise, what happens is that you say, we want reform, we want reform, we want reformation. Well, reformation not at the expense of tearing the fabric of our community. The unity of our community is paramount. And if we have to go a little slow to try and carry everybody with us, so be it. We have waited this long, we can wait a little longer. But the train must leave the station. That's what I say.
So my question is, and I'll take the liberty to do it because I represent women of the community and I always want to empower them. When we look at this evolving Khoja history and we look about history and the change, all of you had a lot of information that you shared, but I didn't hear any contribution or any mention of any women in this journey. Is there something significant that you feel that you could have included in terms of women's contribution now, in the past, and in the future? Thanks.
There can be no progress, no reformation in the community without the involvement of women.
For those of us who are interested in history, to be more attuned to women's stories. And then second of all, for women themselves to write their stories. I mean, that's really important. Now, the ability to write your own history is democratized. Everyone's literate. This material we can put on the internet. So I think that's something that would be very, very helpful if women are writing their own stories. What are their experiences? And giving that an important place in the Federation Samachar and other places,
When we were doing the documentary, we acknowledged the role of the silent role, because that's a historical fact. But today we see in our Jamaats, we see in our institutions, Mark is a case in point, you're part of that Mark has a majority of female leaders which is leading this institution. We don't look at gender. We look at the expertise and the competence of the people. I think we should be gender blind as a community. It's not about males and females. It's about taqwa. It's about who that person is.
Because we are so inclusive here, we are inundated by other cultures. And those other cultures are seeping into our ways of doing things. And this causes a lot of problem for many people, but it doesn't get spoken about because it's a very bad thing to do. You'll be branded as a racist, as an exclusionist or something like that, but it happens.
One thing we have to accept that because we live in a very diverse society, the Khoja community will face this issue of other cultures coming with us, joining us. Now, not at the expense. Now, that is something which we have to now obviously think about. But what I'm saying to you is that it is not beyond our wit to accept others. એક મોટામાં મોટું challenge જે આપણી પાસે છે આજે is how to manage diversity. We live in plural world. We live in global world. And if we don't have the skills to manage diversity of opinion, diversity of interpretation, diversity of thoughts, and if we say, no, this thought we don't like, and this interpretation we don't like, and આ બરાબર નથી ઇસ્લામ માટે, અને આ જ ઇસ્લામ આપણું જે છે એ જ બરાબર છે, that is not right.
In the audience asked the question, what should we do next? But one answer to almost all the questions that we heard from this side may lie in the fact that we are not immune or single in comparison to other communities. Several of the communities before us that are immigrants to this country, whether it's 200 years ago or 2 years ago, have faced this. We built this center based on what we learned from the Jews, as Sikandar Kara will remind us, because they came here in 1904, we came in 1972. Maybe, without taking too much time, the answer would lie if all of us, including me, looks at the other communities, see how they've solved the question about whether it's Khoja, the language, the religion, and we might learn something from them. Thank you.
કરીને મારો એક છેલ્લો મેસેજ એ છે તમારા તરફ કે આટલા 5 વર્ષ થયા તમે આ માર્કની સંસ્થાને તમે પૂરો સાથ આપેલો છે. ટોરોન્ટો જમાતે ઘણો સાથ આપેલો છે, તમારી સંસ્થાએ ઘણો સાથ આપેલો છે ગુલામભાઈ, અને મને તમારા એકનો તમારો આભાર વ્યક્ત કરું છું. તમે જેટલી મહેનત કરેલી છે, બધા છોકરાઓ નાના મોટાઓએ, બધી બાઈઓ નાના મોટાઓએ જેટલી મહેનત કરેલી છે આ સંસ્થાને આગળ લાવવા માટે, અલ્હમ્દુલિલ્લાહ આજે આપણે જોઈએ છીએ કે આટલા ઘણા પેટર્ન્સ થઈ ગયા છે, પણ અમને હજી ઘણા પેટર્ન્સની જરૂર છે, ઓછા છે. કારણ કે આ જે સંદેશો, જે મેસેજ પહોંચાડવાનો છો માર્કનો, જો તમે અમને સાથ આપશો તો આપણે બધા એક થઈને આગળ લાવી શકશું. પણ જો તમે સાથ નહીં આપો પ્રમુખ સાહેબને તો આપણે કેમ આગળ આવશું? અને આ આપણા માટે છે, આપણા બચ્ચાઓ માટે છે, આપણા પોતાઓ માટે છે, નવાસા માટે છે. મને આશા છે કે આ જે સંદેશો હું તમને પહોંચાડ્યો તમને દિલમાં કોતરાઈ જશે અને એના ઉપર તમે ચર્ચા વિચારણ કરશો અને એને ફેલાવશો ઇન્શાઅલ્લાહ.